The Galactic Council ignored Earth's final warning. Now they beg. The chamber smelled like something ancient and arrogant. I had been told that before I arrived, that the Grand Convocation Hall on Kepler Station carried a scent the translators described as ceremonial authority. What it actually smelled like was dust, privilege, and a complete lack of urgency. I walked through the tall bronze doors with a data slate in one hand and 4 years of carefully documented terror in the other, and not a single one of the 47 delegations in that room looked up when I entered. My name is Ilara Voss. I am the senior delegate of Earth to the Galactic Council, and I had exactly 20 minutes to convince several dozen alien civilizations that they were all about to die. I was not nervous. I want to be clear about that. I was not nervous because I had already run every possible version of this conversation in my head during the 7-week transit from Earth, and in every version, the ending was the same. The only question was how much dignity I could hold onto while it happened. I walked to the central speaking platform. It was designed for species averaging 3 meters in height, so I had to use the step that the station staff had quietly placed there when they saw my registration. Small kindness. I stepped up, looked out across the chamber, and began. The void cascade had been documented for the first time 212 years ago when the Thar system went dark. Not destroyed, not conquered, dark. Every star in a system of 9 planets, gone quiet in 48 hours like a candle being pressed between 2 fingers. The Thar were gone. Their ships, their stations, their signals, their history gone. The Galactic Council at the time had labeled it a localized spatial anomaly and moved on. I had read those original session transcripts on the flight over. The casual indifference in them was remarkable. We had found the cascade again 14 months ago. Our deep-range sensor array at the edge of the Kuiper belt, a human-built system that most council species did not know existed, because we had learned long ago to do our important work quietly, had picked up the same resonance pattern the Thar had reported in their final transmissions. Same frequency, same expanding geometry. It was not moving randomly. It was moving toward the populated core of the galaxy, and it was accelerating. I laid all of this out in clean, simple language. I had the data on every screen in the chamber. I had the projections, the trajectory models, the timeline. The earliest affected systems outside human space would begin to experience the leading edge of the cascade in approximately 3 years. The Council's most densely populated central systems had perhaps 11 years. Earth, positioned at the outer edge of charted space, had slightly longer, but only slightly. I spoke for 18 minutes. I answered 2 questions. The first came from the representative of the Crix Collective, an insectoid species whose translator unit rendered their language as a series of dry clicking tones that somehow always managed to sound dismissive. The Crix delegate asked whether Earth's sensor technology had been independently verified by a recognized council member species. I said it had not, because Earth was not yet a recognized full member, and therefore had no access to the verification networks. I noted, without any particular emotion, that this was a structural problem the Council might want to examine given the circumstances. The second question came from Sovereign Erith of the Velsharath. The Velsharath were the oldest recognized spacefaring civilization in the Council, and Erith had held his position for longer than any human nation had existed in its current form. He was enormous, pale, and looked at me with the particular expression of someone who has been mildly entertained by a small animal. He asked if Earth scientists had considered the possibility that the sensor data was being misinterpreted due to the limitations of human instrumentation. I looked at him for a moment before answering, just a moment. I said yes, we had considered that possibility and had run 46 independent cross-checks against archived Thar data obtained through Council records, all of which confirmed our readings. I said that if he would like, I could walk through each of the 46 checks individually. I had time. I had prepared for exactly this. He declined. The vote came quickly. 41 delegations voted to classify Earth's warning as non-credible and to strike it from the formal record. 6 delegations, the smaller ones, the newer ones, the ones that still remembered what it felt like to be ignored, voted in favor of further investigation. I listened to the result. I nodded once. Then I said the words I had prepared, not because I thought they would change anything, but because they needed to be on record, because someday someone would read the transcripts of this session, and I wanted those words to be there. I said, Earth has survived things that would end most civilizations. We have survived on our own without help, without a council, without anyone telling us we mattered. We are not asking you to save us. We are warning you because it is the right thing to do, and because we believe that the right thing is worth doing even when the room is not listening. This is the last time we will bring this warning to this floor. What happens next is not our choice. It is yours. Nobody responded. A few delegates were already reviewing other agenda items on their slates. I stepped down from the platform. I picked up my data slate. I walked to the bronze doors and I pushed them open, and I did not look back. Outside the chamber, in the long corridor that smelled like recycled air, and whatever the Velsherath used for floor polish, my aide, a young man named Owen Park, who had joined the delegation straight out of university and still had the slightly stunned expression of someone realizing that space was real, fell into step beside me. He asked me what we were going to do now. I told him we were going to go home. He asked if that was it, if we were just going to give up. I thought about how to explain it to him. Owen was 26. He had grown up in a world that was already in space, already reaching outward, already dreaming of the stars as places to go rather than lights in the sky. He had not grown up with the older knowledge, the knowledge that humans carry in their bones from centuries of hard experience. I told him that giving up and walking away are two completely different things. He did not fully understand, not yet. But he would. I had made one call before leaving the station. Encrypted, routed through 4 relay points, using a frequency the Council's communication network did not monitor because they did not know it existed. The call reached a man named Don Achafer on the dark side of Neptune, in a facility that did not appear on any map the Galactic Council had ever been given. The call lasted 11 seconds. I told him the vote had gone the way we expected. He said he knew. I told him to move to the next phase. He said it was already in progress. I cut the connection and walked to my ship. Behind me, the grand convocation hall hummed with the noise of 47 civilizations going about their business, completely unaware that the most dangerous species in that corridor had just quietly decided to stop asking for permission. I want to tell you something about Neptune that most people do not know. When you are standing on the surface of Triton, which is less standing and more magnetic boot-walking across a plane of frozen nitrogen, and you look up, Neptune fills a significant portion of the sky. It is massive and blue and deeply indifferent to your existence. The cold there is not the kind of cold you feel on Earth. It is not unpleasant cold or inconvenient cold. It is the kind of cold that makes the human body understand, at a very fundamental level, that it is in a place that was never designed for it. I had worked there for 9 years. My name is Don Achafer. I am the director of Project Aegis, and if you are reading this account, then either we succeeded or we failed so completely that it no longer matters who reads what. When Alara's call came through, I was standing in the main assembly bay of Facility Triton 7, watching the final hull plating being locked onto the 14th and last of our Warden-class vessels. The ship had no name yet. We had been calling it Unit 14 for 2 years, and I had been quietly arguing with my senior engineers about what to name it for most of that time. I named it that night. I named it the Thermopylae, after a place on Earth where a small group of people held a very difficult line for a very long time. My chief engineer. A woman named Caroline Drew said it was a grim name for a ship. I told her that was the point. Let me explain what Aegis was, because it was never announced and it was never going to be. 3 years before Alara stood in that council chamber, our sensor array had given us the first confirmed readings of the Void Cascade's return. The data went immediately to a very small group of people, the kind of group that exists in every government, in every era, whose entire purpose is to look at worst-case scenarios and ask, what do we actually do about this? The answer they arrived at was, by any measure, extraordinary. Earth would not wait for permission. Earth would not appeal to a council that viewed us as children. Earth would build. Quietly, completely, without announcement, we would construct what no species in the Galactic Council had ever thought to build, not because they lacked the technology, but because they had spent so long in peaceful cooperation that the instinct for independent survival had gone soft. Humans had not lost that instinct. We had simply stopped talking about it in polite company. The Warden-class ships were unlike anything in Council space. I say this not with pride, but with accuracy. Council warships, when they existed at all, most species preferred diplomatic resolution, which is genuinely admirable, were elegant things. Smooth-hulled, energy-efficient, built with the kind of craftsmanship that comes from thousands of years of refining a design. They were beautiful. Our ships were not beautiful. They were dense. They were angular. They were built from a titanium-tungsten composite alloy that our materials engineers had developed specifically for this project, because we needed something that could withstand pressures and temperatures beyond the tolerances of anything currently in production. They were full of redundant systems, backups to the backups, fail-safes for the fail-safes, because we had learned in ways large and small across our history that things go wrong at the worst possible moment. And when they do, you need something left to work with. Caroline liked to say that human engineering was ugly because it was honest. A council ship was built assuming things would go well. Our ships were built assuming things would not. Each warden carried a crew of 312. The crew selection process had been the hardest part of my job for the past several years, not because finding qualified people was difficult, but because I had to find people who could live in the dark, literally, for extended periods, who could work in conditions that would unsettle anyone, and who could do all of this while keeping an enormous secret. I had found them. There is something about a specific type of human being, quiet, competent, not interested in recognition, that makes them very good at working on the edge of the known world. Facility Triton 7 was full of them. The science team had been working on the cascade problem in parallel with the construction program. Our lead physicist, a man named Gavin Shore, had spent 3 years doing nothing else. He had the kind of focused intelligence that made you slightly nervous to be in the same room with him, not because he was unpleasant, but because you could see him thinking, and it was very clear that his thoughts were moving much faster than anything you were likely to contribute. Gavin had found something in the Thar data, something the Council had dismissed because it came from a species they had already written off, recorded in a format they considered archaic, describing phenomena they had decided were anomalous and therefore not worth modeling carefully. The cascade had a rhythm. It was not random. It was not chaotic. Under the apparent disorder of a dark energy phenomenon consuming entire star systems, there was a pattern, a pulse, almost. A frequency of expansion and brief contraction, repeated at intervals that Gavin had measured to 4 decimal places. It was, he told me one evening with the expression of a man who had not slept in several days, and had just discovered something that made sleep feel completely unnecessary, almost biological in its regularity. Almost like a heartbeat. I had looked at him for a long time when he said that. He said he was not suggesting the cascade was alive. He was suggesting that it behaved according to a principle we had seen before in nature, and that principles we had seen before were principles we might be able to work with. He had a theory. It was, by his own admission, derived from a combination of deep ocean sonar research, nuclear pulse physics, and what he called extremely optimistic applied mathematics. It was the kind of theory that would have been laughed out of a council research presentation. It was also, as far as we could determine, the only theory that had any chance of working. The night the final warden was named, I gathered the full senior staff of Aegis in the main briefing room, a room carved directly into Triton's rock, lit by panels that had been running continuously for 9 years, smelling of recycled air, and the particular brand of coffee that Caroline brought in by the case from a small roaster in Lagos. I told them about Ilara's call. I told them the council had voted the way we expected. Nobody looked surprised. Nobody looked defeated. They looked like people who had known for a long time that this moment was coming and had used the time well. I told them we were moving to active deployment phase. 14 ships, full crews departing in staggered intervals over the next 72 hours. Our destination was the outer edge of Velsharath space, where the Cascade's trajectory placed its earliest arrival point. We would be there ahead of it. We would be ready. Owen Park, Ilara's aide, who had transferred to Aegis after their return from Kepler Station, raised his hand and asked what our rules of engagement were with council vessels if we encountered them en route. I told him the rules were simple. We did not start anything. We did not back down from anything. We helped anyone who needed help without waiting to be asked, because that was what we did. He wrote it down. As the briefing broke up and people moved toward their ships, Caroline fell into step beside me. She was quiet for a moment. Then she asked if I thought it was going to work. I told her I thought Gavin's numbers were right. She asked if I thought we were going to be okay. I thought about that for a moment. The full honest answer was long and complicated and involved a great deal of probability modeling that did not produce uniformly comforting results. I told her we were going to do the job. She nodded that was enough. 2 days later, 14 ships left the shadow of Neptune. They rose into the dark without announcement, without broadcast, without a single signal that any council monitoring station could have detected. 14 enormous, ugly, completely honest human ships pointed at the place where the stars were going out. Behind us, Triton was dark and silent. Ahead of us, the galaxy had no idea we were coming. That was fine. We had always worked better as a surprise. 3 years. That is how long it takes for certainty to become catastrophe when nobody acts on it. I was standing on the bridge of the Endurance when the first distress signal arrived from the Velsharath outer colonies. Not a formal transmission. They had a whole protocol for formal transmissions, 17 steps of authentication and diplomatic framing. This was a raw signal, unencrypted, going out on every frequency simultaneously. That is what genuine panic sounds like. It does not have time for protocol. My name is still Ilara Voss, and I want to tell you what it felt like to be right about something terrible. It does not feel like victory. I want to be clear about that. It does not feel like vindication or satisfaction or any of the things that I suppose a lesser version of myself might have wanted to feel after standing in that chamber and being dismissed by people who should have known better. It feels like a weight settling into your chest that you know is going to be there for a long time. The Endurance was the flagship of the Aegis fleet, and I had come aboard 4 days before our arrival at the frontier of Velsharath space. Don had offered me the position of civilian liaison to the fleet command, which was a formal title for what was actually a much simpler arrangement. He trusted my judgment on political situations, and both of us knew the political situation ahead was going to be complicated. We arrived at the frontier and stopped. What we saw was difficult to describe, and I have been trying to find the right words for it since. The cascade did not look like what I had expected from the data. Data gives you numbers. Numbers give you scale. But scale, when you are floating in space looking at it directly, become something else entirely. Stars were going out, one at a time in sequence like lights in a building losing power room by room. There was no explosion, no debris field, no dramatic event that the human eye could process as something comprehensible happening. A star simply existed, and then it did not, and the darkness left behind was a different quality of darkness from the space around it, thicker, somehow, and absolutely still. Our sensor operator, a young woman named Fiona Clark, said very quietly that the leading edge of the cascade was moving faster than our models had predicted. Not dramatically faster, but faster. I asked her how much faster. She told me. I told her to update Gavin Shore's team immediately. Then the council ships came. There were 3 of them, and they were moving in the particular way that ships move when they have been in a crisis situation, and are not accustomed to crisis situations, fast and slightly uncontrolled, like someone running who is not used to running. They were Velshirath vessels, elegant and silver, and 2 of them had visible damage along their forward sections. Not weapon damage. Stress fractures from pushing drives too hard for too long. They broadcast on an open channel, and they broadcast on a formal diplomatic channel, and they broadcast on the Galactic emergency network simultaneously, which told me everything I needed to know about their state of mind. They had tried everything. Their ships could not affect the cascade at all. Their standard energy weapons passed through the leading edge without any detectable impact. They had tried barrier fields, gravitational projections, and at least 3 experimental systems that their science teams had reportedly assembled in the field. Nothing had worked. 6 of their outer colony systems had gone completely silent. 700 billion people. Gone. I let that number sit in the room for a moment. I let everyone on the bridge of the Endurance hear it. Then I watched the 3rd Velshirath ship come forward and request a direct communication channel with the human fleet commander. Dawn looked at me. I nodded. The screen opened. Sovereign Erith looked older than when I had last seen him across a council chamber. I had expected that 3 years had passed, and those 3 years had clearly not been kind. But it was more than age. He looked like a person who has had a specific kind of realization, the kind that arrives not as an idea but as a feeling that starts somewhere deep and spreads outward. He looked, in short, like a being who understood that he had been wrong, and that the cost of being wrong was currently being counted in stars. He opened with the Velshirath formal supplication posture. I had read about it but never seen it. It was a full-body movement, something between a bow and a collapse, that their culture reserved for the gravest of circumstances. It was, in their tradition, the most unambiguous way one being could communicate absolute sincerity to another. He said he was requesting assistance. He said he understood if it was not given. The bridge was completely silent. Every person in that room knew what moment this was. I have thought about what I said next many times since. I want to be precise about it because the precision matters. I did not feel triumphant. I did not want him to suffer. I am human, and humans are complicated, and somewhere in my chest there was a small hard thing that felt like 3 years of being dismissed and doubted, but it was small, and I did not let it speak. What I felt more than anything was tired and clear. I told him that humanity had not come to the frontier to make a point. We had come to do a job. I told him that what he needed to send me right now was not an apology. There was no time for apologies, but his full evacuation network for the remaining Velshirath systems within the Cascade's projected path, his complete sensor data from every attempt his fleet had made to affect the Cascade, and the current location and status of every Council vessel in the region. He stared at me. I said it again more simply. I said, "Send me the data. We will handle the Cascade." He sent the data. It arrived in a stream that filled every non-essential screen on the Endurance's bridge, years of desperate research, hundreds of failed experiments, and the coordinates of dozens of civilizations waiting to hear whether they were going to live. Owen Park, who had become genuinely excellent at his job in the time since Kepler's station, was already sorting it, flagging the most critical systems, building a priority list for the evacuation coordination. Gavin Shore's voice came over the internal channel from the science bay. He had been watching the new data come in as it arrived. He said the Velsherath experiments had actually given him something. One of their failed approaches had, without their realizing it, produced a partial resonance effect at the cascade's edge. It had not been strong enough to do anything, but it confirmed that Gavin's frequency model was correct. He said he was ready. I looked out at the stars going dark in the distance. I looked at the 3 silver ships waiting outside our hull. I looked at the data filling the screens, all those names, all those systems, all those people waiting. I thought about the walk I had taken out of the council chamber 3 years ago. I thought about Dawn, 9 years in the dark on the wrong side of Neptune, building ships nobody would see. I thought about Fiona Clark saying faster than predicted in that quiet voice, and Owen sorting evacuation data with his jaw set, and Caroline Drew nomming a ship Thermopylae and calling it a grim choice. Then I got to work. Because that was what we did. I had known since the planning stages that someone would have to go into the core. I had known it the way you know things that you file away and do not look at directly because there is no point in looking at them until they become relevant. It was a mathematical reality. The resonance anchors, when deployed correctly along the outer boundary of the cascade, would disrupt its expansion pattern and begin collapsing its structure from the edges inward. Gavin's models were precise about this. They were also precise about the fact that the collapse process would stall at the core, a region where the cascade's energy density was too concentrated for edge-deployed anchors to reach. The only way to complete the collapse was to place one final anchor at the geometric center of the cascade from the inside. The models were also precise about transit survivability inside the core boundary, 11 minutes before structural failure of any known ship design, human ships included. Gavin had told me this in private 3 weeks before our departure from Triton. He had shown me the numbers carefully, going through each step, as if giving me time to find the error he had not found. I had gone through them. There was no error. I had told him to keep refining and said nothing else. He had kept refining. The 11 minutes had become, with every revision, 11 minutes. My name is Don Akafer. I am writing this portion for the record because I believe it deserves to be recorded accurately, and because Ilara would record it with too much dignity and leave out the parts that were difficult. The fleet reached the deployment zone in standard formation. 14 wardens, spread across a volume of space that covered the cascade's full leading edge. 3 Velsherath vessels held position at the perimeter observation line we had established, close enough to monitor, far enough to be clear of the anchor deployment effect. I watched the first anchor deploy from the bridge of the Thermopylae. It came out of the warden ahead of us, the ship we called the Coventry, and lit up briefly as its drive system activated, carrying it toward the cascade's surface at precisely the angle Gavin's positioning algorithm specified. Then it reached the boundary and disappeared into the dark. 40 seconds later, Fiona Clark's counterpart on the Coventry reported a resonance response. Faint, but present, real. I let out a breath I had been holding for a while. The next 6 anchors deployed in sequence over the following 2 hours. Each one produced a stronger response. Gavin was monitoring from the science bay, and I could hear in his voice across the internal channel the particular quality of a person whose theory is proving correct in real time, and who is almost too focused to feel anything about it yet. The cascade's edge was destabilizing. The outer stars, the ones nearest the deployment line, stopped going dark. In fact, the closest one flickered, just for a moment. A star that had been cooling and fatting at the edge of the cascade's reach flickered. And Fiona said her readings were showing it beginning to restabilize. That was the moment I understood. in a way that went past theory and probability models and months of planning, that it was actually going to work. That was also the moment Gavin's voice came over the channel and said that the core density reading was higher than the latest model projection. I asked him how much higher. He told me. I asked him what that meant for the final anchor. He was quiet for a moment. That silence told me everything before he said the words. He said it meant the anchor carrier would need to hold position at point 0 for a minimum of 4 minutes and 17 seconds after deployment to ensure the resonance wave was fully established. He said that combined with transit time, the total exposure inside the core boundary would be approximately 16 minutes. I did the arithmetic. 16 minutes, core boundary survivability, 11. I said I understood. He asked me what I wanted him to do. I told him to prep the final anchor for deployment from the Thermopylae. His response was very quiet. He said, "Yes, sir." I turned to my bridge crew, 14 people, every one of them looking at me, every one of them knowing what a final anchor deployment from this ship meant. Caroline Drew was there. Owen Park had transferred to the Thermopylae for the mission's final phase. Fiona Clark's equivalent on my crew, a man named Luca Ferris, had his hands flat on his console as if to steady himself. I told them what the mission required. I told them clearly and completely because they deserved clarity. Caroline said she would pilot the anchor insertion herself. She said it quietly and without any drama and looked at me as if she expected me to argue. I told her the insertion required the ship's commander, because the final triggering sequence was command authenticated, and there was no time to reassign command in the field. That was true. I had made it true 3 weeks ago when I quietly adjusted the authentication protocols with Gavin's help. I want to be honest about that. I had planned this part. She knew I had planned it. I could see it in her face. She was angry, and then she was not angry, and then she was something much harder to describe, the expression of a person who respects a decision they hate. I told Owen Park to take the comm station. He moved to it without a word. His hands were not entirely steady, but they did not need to be steady for what I needed him to do. I told Luca to keep the cascade boundary readings live on every screen until I was past the point where the data would matter. He said yes. I turned back to the main viewport. The cascade's interior was not darkness exactly. It was something else, a quality of absence that was almost textured, like looking at a surface that absorbed not just light but the concept of light. The leading edges of the cascade structure moved inside it like slow tides, enormous and indifferent. I opened a fleet-wide channel. I told the fleet that the final phase was beginning. I told them that the outer anchors should continue cycling until the core collapse was confirmed. I told them that if the core collapse did not complete, if something went wrong, they were to pull the council vessels back with them and get to Earth and tell the people there everything they knew. I told them they had done extraordinary work. Then I opened the channel wider, so it would reach the 3 Velsharath ships at the perimeter. Sovereign Erath's face appeared on my secondary screen. He had been watching the whole operation in silence, and I had the impression, reading him across the very significant cultural distance between our species, that he had been doing something while watching that might be described as reconsidering a great many things. He said my name. He said it carefully in the human pronunciation. I told him I needed one thing from him. I told him to look after the fleet. If anything happened that my crew could not manage from outside, I needed him to fill in the gap. I needed the council vessels to act as support for the human fleet after I was inside. He said he would. He said it without ceremony, and that was the right way to say it. I cut the channel. The Thermopylae moved toward the boundary. I am not going to describe the inside of the cascade in technical terms, because Gavin's team will do that with far more accuracy than I can. I am going to describe it as I experienced it, because that is what I can offer. It was cold in a way that bypassed the ship's temperature systems and registered as cold at a level that seemed more than physical. The structural stress on the hull was immediate and continuous, a low vibration that Lucas said was operating within parameters, and that felt like standing on a bridge with very heavy traffic. The resonance frequency that Gavin had identified was everywhere, audible through the hull as a sound below sound, more of a pressure than a noise. The final anchor deployed at the geometric center point. The timer started. 4 minutes and 17 seconds. The first minute was the longest minute I have ever experienced, not because it was painful, because I had a lot to think about and very little of it was afraid. I thought about the facility on Triton, 9 years of cold and work, and a crew that had never complained once about what they were giving up. I thought about Caroline's face when she understood what I had done. I thought about my daughter. She was 14. She was brilliant. She was the kind of person who asked hard questions and waited for real answers, and I hoped with everything I had left that she would have a sky full of stars to look at for the rest of her long life. I told Owen to open a final transmission, outgoing only, broadcast. He opened it. I said, "Tell my daughter I finished the job." I closed the channel. The anchor reached full resonance at 4 minutes and 9 seconds, 8 seconds early. Gavin's math, even under field conditions, had been almost exactly right. The core of the cascade began to collapse inward, the resonance wave spreading outward from the anchor point in a pattern that Gavin later described as the most geometrically perfect thing he had ever measured. The Thermopylae's hull took the full impact of the collapse wave at the 11-minute mark. The lights went out. The stars came back. That is the part I cannot fully explain. Even now, standing at the same podium in the same chamber where I once stood, and was told that humans were too young and too limited to understand what was happening in the galaxy. The stars came back. Not all at once, not in a flash. Slowly, over the 48 hours following the cascade's collapse, the systems that had been at the very edge of the void, the ones that had been cooling, fatting, going quiet, began to restabilize. The energy the cascade had been drawing from them returned, redistributed by the resonance collapse in a way that our physicists are still modeling. 14 star systems at the frontier, systems that had been hours from going permanently dark, relit. My name is Ilara Voss, and I want to tell you what it looked like from the bridge of the Endurance when the first one came back. Fiona Clark said his readings were changing. She said it so quietly that I thought something had gone wrong. Then she said it again, and this time she said, "The star is returning to normal output levels." Then she said nothing at all because there was nothing adequate to say, and we all simply looked at it, this ordinary star, completely unremarkable, that had nearly ceased to exist, burning steadily in the dark. There was no applause. I want to note that because I think it is important. The people on that bridge had just finished something enormous, and they were exhausted in a way that went past the body, and several of them had been in contact with the Thermopylae right up until its signal went dark, and the feeling in that room was not celebration. It was the particular silence of people who understand the full weight of what they have been part of. Owen Park was at the comm station, and I watched him put his head down on his folded arms for a moment, and I did not say anything. Sovereign Erath contacted us 2 hours after the final star restabilized. The Velsherath vessels had stayed at the perimeter through the entire collapse sequence, as he had promised. When the fleet had needed support in the aftermath, coordinating the evacuation status of the outer colonies, relaying signals across the disrupted comm networks, routing emergency supplies, the Council ships had responded instantly, without hesitation. Whatever Erath had been reconsidering during those final hours, the reconsideration had clearly arrived somewhere meaningful. He asked about the Thermopylae. I told him we had not recovered the ship yet. I told him our recovery team was already en route to the last confirmed coordinates. I told him that the survival systems on Warden-class vessels were redundant to a degree that would be unusual in council engineering. I said the word unusual deliberately, and Irith understood the meaning behind it. He said he would hope. I told him hope was appropriate. The recovery team found the Thermopylae 17 hours later. She was damaged extensively, hull integrity at roughly 30%, all primary systems offline, running on emergency reserves. She was also, structurally, still a ship. Gavin's extra redundancy specifications, the ones Caroline had called excessive at every design review, had held. Don Akafer was alive. He had 2 cracked ribs from the impact restraint, a concussion, and hearing damage in his left ear that the medical team said was likely permanent. He was conscious when they reached him. He was sitting at the navigation console with a sealed thermos of coffee that he had apparently prepared before the final approach and had not yet had a chance to open. I flew out to the recovery site personally. I was on the medical transport when they brought him aboard. He looked at me, and he looked at his watch, and he said he had apparently been inside for 12 minutes and 41 seconds. I told him that was 11 minutes longer than it should have been possible to survive. He thought about that for a moment, and then he said that human ships were built to outlast the math. I sat down beside him on the transport bench and did not say anything for a while. That was fine. We had both been doing a great deal of talking for a long time. 6 months later, I walked through the bronze doors of the Grand Convocation Hall for the second time. The smell had not changed. What had changed was everything else. Every seat was filled. Every delegation was present, including 17 species that had not been represented at all during my first visit, because the Galactic Council in its existing form had not yet gotten around to inviting them. That was something I had noted in my preparation notes for today, and I intended to do something about it. Sovereign Irith was in his seat. He looked like someone who had been through something that had rearranged his understanding of the world in ways that were still being processed. I recognized that look. I had seen it on every human face around me for the past 6 months. The session opened, and the first item on the formal agenda was read aloud. The motion to elevate Earth to the first chair of the Galactic Council, previously held by the Velshirath, in recognition of service to all recognized species during the Void Cascade crisis. The vote was unanimous. Every single delegation. I stood at the podium when the result was announced. The chamber was not silent. It was something opposite to silence, a sound that had been building since the vote closed and that contained, I suppose, 47 different species version of what it sounds like when something shifts fundamentally. I let it settle. Then I said, Earth declines. The sound stopped, very completely. I had about 30 seconds before the question started, and I used them. I said that Earth was grateful. I said that what had happened at the frontier was not a human achievement in isolation. It was built on Thar data, on Velshirath sensor records, on 6 alien species who voted in our favor when everyone else refused to listen. It was built on 3 years of humans working in the dark, yes, but also on 10,000 years of human history that taught us what happens when any one group gets to sit at the top of a structure and decide what everyone else is worth. I said we had seen what that looked like. We had experienced it personally and recently. I said we were not interested in repeating it, even from the other side. Then I put forward the proposal I had spent 6 months writing with a team that included Owen Park, Caroline Drew, Gavin Shore, and Don Akafer, who had contributed primarily by reading drafts while lying in a medical bay and writing very precise critiques in the margins. The Galactic Compact, no first chair, no rank species, no civilizations that mattered more than others by default, a flat council with equal representation, operating on the principle that every world with a voice deserved to have it heard, dispute resolution through structured mediation, not power balance. Emergency protocols that did not require any single species to take the lead, instead requiring coordinated response from a standing joint committee, permanently staffed, permanently funded, permanently ready. It was not a perfect document. Don's marginalia had been very specific about that. No document that tries to organize tens of thousands of civilizations across millions of light years is going to be perfect. But it was honest, and it was equitable, and it started from a place that the Galactic Council in its old form had never truly started from. The assumption that everyone in the room mattered equally from the first moment they walked through the door. Irith was the first to speak in response. He stood slowly. The Velsharath move in ways that suggest considerable physical weight and dignity simultaneously. And he said that he had spent the past 6 months reading the history of human civilizations, which he had never done before in the century and a half he had served in the Council. He said he found it remarkable, not in the way he had expected. He had expected to find a history of aggression, of the kind of relentless forward drive that humans had displayed at the frontier, and he had found that yes, that was there. But what he had not expected to find, woven all through it, was the pattern of what humans did after the hard thing was done. He said humans had a habit of winning difficult things, and then immediately arguing about how to make sure winning did not turn into something worse than losing had been. He said he found that unusual and admirable, and more than a little exhausting to read about. The chamber did something that I can only describe as laughing, in 47 different ways simultaneously. He said he was voting in favor of the compact. The vote took 3 hours, because the document was long and several delegations had genuine questions that deserved real answers. Owen handled most of the questions from the floor, which he did with a calm efficiency that made me aware that he had grown into something quite different from the 26-year-old with the slightly stunned expression who had walked beside me out of this same hall years ago. The compact passed. After the session, I stood alone for a moment at a viewport in the corridor outside the chamber, the same corridor that smelled like floor polish. Through the viewport, the stars were visible, ordinary stars, doing ordinary things, burning quietly in the dark the way they were meant to. Somewhere among those stars, at the coordinates we had filed with the new Compact's memorial registry, a damaged ship drifted in a stable orbit around a small and unremarkable planet. The Thermopylae, preserved intact at the location where the recovery team had found her. The Compact's very first formal resolution, passed before the document was even fully ratified, had been to name her a monument of interspecies significance. I thought about Don's last transmission, the one Owen had broadcast on every channel, so that every ship in the fleet and every council vessel at the perimeter had heard it. "Tell my daughter I finished the job." His daughter was 17 now. Her name was Nadia, and she was, by all accounts, already formidably intelligent, and already asking the kind of hard questions that suggested she was going to be difficult to argue with in approximately 5 more years. She had attended the compact signing ceremony, standing next to her father, who was still wearing a hearing aid in his left ear, and who had spent most of the ceremony looking at things with the expression of a man who is trying to memorize them. I stood at the viewport a while longer. I thought about every version of this story that had not happened. The version where the council had listened 3 years ago and acted quickly and perhaps no stars had needed to go dark at all. The version where the cascade had moved faster and our ships had not been ready. The version where Gavin's numbers had been slightly different, and the 11 minutes had simply been 11 minutes with no possible extension. I thought about a very long history of human beings standing at edges and making choices in the dark. There is a thing that people say about humans that I have heard now from multiple alien species trying to make sense of us. They say that we seem to carry our history with us in a way that other species do not. That we are shaped by things that happened long before any currently living human was born. That we act as if we remember things we were never present for. I think that is true. I think it is one of the most important things about us. We remember being ignored. We remember what it cost. And then, and this is the part that seems to confuse people, we choose not to do it to others. Not because we are noble, not because it is easy, because we know the specific weight of it in our bodies, in our history, in the way we build things and name ships and stand at podiums and say no when someone offers us the seat at the top. Because once, a very long time ago, nobody warned us, and we were almost lost, and we survived anyway by the narrowest of margins, more times than anyone should have to survive, and we came out the other side of each survival having learned the same lesson again and again, until it was not a lesson anymore but simply what we were. We warn, we build, we help. Not for recognition, not for a seat at the head of a table, but because the alternative is a galaxy where stars go out one by one and nobody says anything until it is too late. We had already lived in that galaxy. We did not intend to live in it again.